Hey everyone, so Indra here. This is my very first video in this channel. So the purpose actually I was creating this channel just to train myself to be more fluent in English, to be more active speaking in English, and also to be more active doing code. I was learning code few months ago, and I think if I do kind of tutorial and try to get used to do coding, I think it will make me better, and I think it would help to increase my knowledge in coding. So anyway, our tutorial today is actually doing CRUD with NextJs. So what is CRUD? CRUD stands for create, read, update, delete. So it's very basic skill for any web developer to do like just database operational just database operational things. So you can do like creating data to the database, and you can read the data from the database, and also updating and deleting. So without any further ado, let's do it. So we will use NextJS for our framework. It's kind of one of the best framework out there. And we also using PrismaORM. It's kind of a database toolkit framework that allows you to connect with Postgres, MySQL, SQL Server, SQLite, MongoDB, and CockroachDB. And in this case, we will use PostgreSQL, and we can get the PostgreSQL from railway.app. It's very simple and it's free, and you can use as you wish. Alright, so let's set up our Next.js. So for setuping the Next.js boilerplate, you can go to docs, and you can see some of command here to create the next app. And for example, this one we can use for creating the next app with vanilla JavaScript, but at this case we will use TypeScript. If you haven't used or never creating the TypeScript project, no worries, we can go along together. Just for your information, why I'm using TypeScript, because it's very handy to manage the error before we doing deployment. It's very simple to use, and yeah, let's do it. We copy here, and we can just enter, and we can put our project name NextCRUD. Yep. Next things, we need to go to NextCRUD project folder. NextCRUD project folder, and we need to install our PrismaORM. To install our Prisma, we can do yarn add and then Prisma. This Prisma dependencies is just for Prisma CLI. We can do like just command line in the terminal, so we can work with Prisma. And also we need the new dependencies called Prisma/client. So we need two Prisma for the CLI and a Prisma client for our instance inside our Next.js. Alright, cool. So next things, we need to set up our database inside Railway. Actually, you can use kind of like Heroku if you don't like the Railway, but in this case, I will use Railway because it's simple and it's free. Let's start a new project, and you can just deploy new PostgreSQL project and just wait till it finishes. Yep, it's finished, and we can start working on it. So the next things, we can start open our project folder inside our Visual Studio Code. You can just type code and then dot like this, and we can open. Yep. So we will set up our view here. I will make it bigger so you can read better. Okay. Alright, so next things, we can start to testing our boilerplate yarn dev, and then we can open this URL and we can see the NextJs boilerplate has been works. Okay, so next things, I will clean up our boilerplate. The very first things, I will clean up the index. For example, here I will delete all the elements here. I will just use h1 next CRUD like this. Okay, and then I can delete this. Okay, just save. You can see here, and we can go to the styles and we delete home.module.css because we don't need to do that. Sorry, we don't need to use that. And we can see here in the global CSS, we can see some of boilerplate code and CSS styles. Let's leave it. So we will focus on our app. Alright, so we will go to Prisma and we will see the documentation here, and we can type CRUD in the search field there, and we can open the CRUD documentation. So it's very simple. For example, here to create the data, it's just using the Prisma dot the database name and dot create, and the key is the data, and then we can put the data details. All right, so let's set up our Prisma. To do this, we can just do npx. Okay, I will clean up npx Prisma init, and this Prisma init will generate the new folder called Prisma, and inside this folder there is a new file called schema.prisma. This schema.prisma is just a file we can use for modeling our database. Okay, so before we doing more, we can start to set up our database and connecting our database. First, we can go to .env and we can copy the Postgres connect here, the string. We can copy here and paste to the .env and save, and then we good to go. Alright, so for the example here, we can go to data and we don't have any tables yet. To modeling our database, it's very simple. You can just type model. That means you will model the database and then the database name like this, and then just curly braces and start with ID. Okay, and we can use the data type string. Okay, and then we define this as ID, and for the default value it will generate from CUID. For example here, from the CUID, and then we can create the title using string, and then we can create the content using string. We can save, and we can start to generate our database inside our Postgres. To do that, we can just npx prisma db push, and we can wait till it's finished. Yep, you can see here it's starting generating our database. We can see in post, and there is 3 field or 3 columns called the first one is ID, exactly the ID, title, and the content. Okay, so the next thing, we will start to set up our CRUD in API folder. Okay, cool. So next things, we will do like creating the endpoint for our API. I will start with cleaning up the terminal, and let's yarn dev and let's refresh this. And then we can go to our pages folder, and then inside the API folder I will create a folder called let's say it's post like this, and then I will just use this hello.ts from the default boilerplate. I will copy there or move there, and I will change this to be create data. Okay, so you can see here the create data with the boilerplate. If you can't read here, I'll just explain. So it's actually the handler from the API Next.js, and if the response is 200, which is successfully, it will send the response with exactly this one. Okay, with exactly this one. So we will start to test this, and you can see if I go to the API endpoint, it's giving the response as it is. So if I change here either Zulfi and I save and then I refresh, it also giving the right response. Okay, so the next things what I will do is actually importing the Prisma client from the Prisma client, and then creating the constructor Prisma. Yep, exactly like that. And we can save and we can start to work on here. Okay, so the first thing, I will go to our documentation here for create. I will create cons post and then await. Since it's using await, we need to add async, so the await will work properly there. Await, and then we use the constructor Prisma, and then the database name with lowercase, and do create. Okay, exactly like this. And we call data for the key, and then we can add title. I will just use hard coding here, hello world, and the content is the first. This is my first post. Okay, so the next things, we need to put this post as our response. So I will just put here and we will save. So whenever we create this one, whenever we access this endpoint, it will automatically create this post. So let's go to this endpoint, exactly still the same endpoint, and then I will enter, that means refreshing, and see the response from the database is the ID. It's exactly the using the CUID generated ID, and the title is hello world, and the content, this is my first post. To verify this, we can open our new terminal, and we can open npx Prisma Studio, and when we open, it will open the post, exactly the post database, and it will show the data, and you can see the ID, exactly the ID here, and the hello world for the title, and the content is this is my first post. That means our API endpoint for creating data is finished. Alright, next thing, we need to create the get data or fetching data from the database endpoint. So we can just copy paste here, and we call fetch, or maybe get data, or just data, it's up to you. So the difference here is actually only on this line. So we can delete the data key, and then for example here I will just use post with as there, and then we can use find many. Okay, find many, and then we can save, and we can start to accessing this endpoint, and you can see from the endpoint get data, I got the data from the database. Because we have only one data, we can only read one data, but you can see it's inside our array bracket, that means we can have more than one data. So that means our fetching database data endpoint is finished. Okay, cool. So next thing, we need to create the delete data. I will just do like this, copy paste and delete data.ts. And what we can do here is actually const pos. Okay, we'll use single or singular, and then await pause, and then we can delete, and we can use the filter where. Okay, and what is the filter? ID with this one. Okay, we'll use that for the example, and then we can save, and we can try to test this, but we will lose this data, but no problem. I will try to duplicate this and change this to delete data, and let's see. Yep, it's working. And if we accessing the get data endpoint and we refresh, we will not get anything because it has been deleted. So it's very simple to use, and that means our delete data endpoint is finished. Alright, cool. So the last thing is creating the update data endpoint. I will just copy paste from the delete data, and then we can rename as update data. Okay, so next things, because we don't have any post here, so we will try to create the post using this endpoint, and we will just enter, and let's see, we have our new content, and then we come back to get data, and let's see. Yep, we got this data. So to demo our update data endpoint, I will use this ID, okay, to update. So what we do here, const pos, and then await Prisma pos, and you can use update where the ID is here. Okay, and then you need to add the data, and what do you need to change? So for example here, I will change the title as Hey Indra. Okay, and then we can start to accessing this endpoint. For example, I will just duplicate here, and let's try to update data, and let's see if it works. And yes, you can see the data has been changed, and we can start to refresh this get data. If it's changed, yep, it's changed. That means we have already set up our for CRUD endpoint, and now we can start working on the front end. Alright, so in this step, we will try to use this endpoint to mapping with our front end. For example, we will try with the get data. So before we doing that, I will just import the React hook, which is use state and use effect. Okay, and then I will try to use data, const data, and then set data. Okay, very cool. So I will create the function for fetching the data, const fetch data async, like that. And then what I will do is const response await, and then using fetch, and then we're using the API post get data. Cool. So, and then we can go to JSON, const JSON await respond exactly like that, and then we can start to console the JSON, and then we can save. And now to make it works, we can start to use the use effect snippets. Okay, if you don't know what is use effect, try to research yourself. I'll just fetch data like this, and then let's save, and we open the console. Yep, you can see here, this is the data. So rather than we console the JSON, we will use this JSON as the data. So we will use set data like that. Okay, this is the fetch data. Now we need to mapping this data to our front end. First thing first, we will wrap this with div, and then I will use div also to create the data map, and then we can create the mapping return, and then we can start with div like that, and let's say this is the h3 title. Okay, and then this is the content. Okay, cool. So you can see we have one only data, and so it's a mapping one data only. But if we have more than one data, and we will create later, it will automatically mapping. So the first thing here, you can see we have error because we don't have any key for the map. But before we doing that, we will destructure the ID, title, and content, and we can use this ID as the key like that, and then we can use this as the title and use this as the content, and we can save, and you can see it exactly the data from our database. If we refresh, we will not have any error, and it automatically fetch the data. Okay, the next things, we will create our form to create the data. So let's do it fast. Div, and then we create form, and then we can use input, placeholder title, and then placeholder content, and we can use button type submit. If you are wondering what I'm using here, it's actually GitHub Copilot, so it's very fast, and yeah, it's very cool. Alright, so we have already created the form. So the first thing, we need to create the handler. For example, here I will create on submit. I will create the handler, handle create data. Okay, and we can start here to create the function handle create data, and we will use async. Okay, and then we need to do exactly the same as the up one there. I will just copy here, create response, await, fetch, and then we need to access the create data, not the get data, create data, and then we can put the request. For example, here the method. Okay, method, and I will use post. Actually, you don't need this, but this is just for example. I will use post, and then we can add header there, And then the content type, you can type the application JSON, and then the next things is the body stringify. We don't have anything here. Okay, we don't have anything here, but later we will use the data from this form. So next things, we need to create the event. So when we submit, it will not refreshing. We need to create the event, and then you can see here we will do event prevent default. But we have error here because we don't have any type for the event. So actually the TypeScript will catch the error because it's strict static typing. So we need to add React and then form event like that. Okay, so form event. So the next thing, we need to create the cons, the inputted data, and then we can set inputted data, and then we create here the data name, title, yep, like that, and the content. So we have blank data. So the next things, we will use this on change. We can create event there, and then set inputted data, for example that, and then we can use the spread operator and inputted data. I will do like this so you can read better. Inputted data, and the title is the target dot value. Okay, since we have this one, we need to also use this inside the content. Okay, I will change this as the content, and then we can save. All right, so the next thing, we can try to keep console the inputted data so we can see if this form has been worked. Okay, for example, see, you can see the title and you can see also the content, and it works. Okay, so the next thing is to add here. Okay, what is the data? The title is inputted data.title, and the content is inputted data.content. So when we save here, okay, we save, and then we can start going to the create data endpoint, and we need to add here if rec method is post. Yep, we need to do this. Okay, we need to do this. So this is just for protecting your just for protecting your endpoint with post method. So yeah, it's just simple. And then what we need to do here is doing the structuring with the title and the content. Where it's come from, it's come from the request.body. So when we fetching the data here using this endpoint, it will sending the request body from the body here, and then we the structure from the title and the content, and we can change here the title, it takes from here, and the content takes from there. Okay, to simplify this, you can just do like that and save. And let's start to try to the try handle create data. We can console log JSON. Okay, let's try hello Indra, or might be hello world. This is from the form. Okay, let's submit, and let's see if there is a response. See, the response is right there, but we didn't see the data here. It's okay, but this means we have finished creating our create data function. Alright, we almost there. So the next thing, we need to create the delete handle data. So I will create here cons handle delete data, and then we can use async, might be, yep. Okay, I will delete the data based on the ID, but because the ID is string, we will need to put here string. Okay, and then we start to console log the ID. Okay, so the next things, we need to add a new element here, button like that, and then put delete data. Okay, so whenever we click this on click, we need to add the handle delete data, but because we have expected the ID parameter, we need to add the ID parameter there. So we will need to do like this, and we put the ID. Okay, so let's see, we have already 2, and if we delete here, and this is the ID for the first post, and then this is the ID for the second post. Alright, so the next thing, we need to create here, like for example, cons respond exactly like that. Okay, and then we start with method. We will create the post, and then the header is exactly the same. Okay, and then the body is JSON stringify ID like that. Okay, and then we can start to fix this, and then the next one, we need to const the JSON, await response JSON, and console the response. Alright, so the next things, we need to go to our delete data endpoint. We will put the same if request dot method is post, and then we can do this. So the ID, we will the structure the ID, okay, from const ID, from request the body, and then we will use this ID where in the filter. So exactly like that. Okay, so the next thing, we can try our delete data, and let's see if it's there. We delete and see the response. Yep, if I refresh here, and I only got 1 data. So to make it easier, actually after we console the JSON, we can start to refetch the data with just calling the function here, and also here inside the handle create data. So whenever we finish, for example data, example content, when we submit here, and it will call the fetch data and will automatically adding the data inside our mapping here. Test data content, and we can see, yeah, But the problem here is our input is still the same, so we need to create one more thing here to set inputted data with name, title blank, and content is blank. Okay, when we try here, and then yep, it works here, but it doesn't work here. So what happened is actually we didn't set the value, this value, inside the inputted data, title and content, inside the value of our input. So what we need to do here is creating the value props, and then inputted data title, and then here value inputted data content. But you will get error. See, you will get error. It's because we try to changing the uncontrolled input. So we need to add one more thing here. So we need to add like this, so it will works properly, and we can refresh. And let's say here is test, and then test, and we submit, and yep, it's submitting the data, it's there, and we have cleaned our form. Alright, so this is the last step. We will do edit data. We will add the edit data here, so we can update our database on the selected post. For example, here I will add a new button. Let's say it's button edit, like that. Save it. Yeah. So the next thing, we will create the on-click props, on-click, and then we add the handle edit data, would you like that? And the thing that we pass there is actually all of the data there, ID, title, and also content. Okay, so let's say we can create the function here, and you can see here we can have ID, and then we expected also the title, and it is a string, and also content, and it's also string. Okay, okay, cool. So the next one, we need to try the console log the ID, and then the title and content. Okay, so let's say if we click like this, you can see the content that we pass to our function is the ID, and also the title, and also the content. So what I wanted to do is actually passing this content, the title and the content, into our form here. So what we can do is actually we can do like set inputted data, because we want to pass this title to input the data here, and let's say like that. Okay, so for example here, if we edit, and you can see it passing there. Yep, passing there, but we need also to passing the ID. So we will add ID here, it's like that, and then we pass the ID also. Why? Because we need to filter later. We use this ID for the filtering when we update the data from the API. Okay, cool. So the next thing, I need to create a new use state hook, might be edit mode, like that, set edit mode, and the default value is actually false because we don't need to do edit mode in the first place. So the next thing here, we will add here set edit mode true. So whenever we click edit, and the edit mode will set to be true. Okay, the next thing, we need to create the cons. Okay, cons handle update data like that, async, and then we just pass the string. I don't think we need that. Yeah, we need to exactly like that, and then we can do like here, e prevent default, it's exactly like that. And you can see if I use the what you call that, the GitHub Copilot, it's very fast, and you can see my code is very fast, and this is what I expected also. I wanted to create this response, and it takes the API and it passing the ID, title, content, and then it will console the JSON also, and then the set input data will come back to blank, and it will remove the edit mode, so it will false. So okay, so now what we need to do, because when we submit this on submit, it will goes to handle create data. So what I wanted to do is actually let's add here, okay, because we need this one. Okay, so the next thing, we will create if edit mode, which is true. We will call the handle update data. Okay, that's it. And here, okay, we can remove that because we don't need any. We can use this one, so handle update data, and then we can else. Okay, all right, so the thing is here, if we going with edit data and then we submit, that means we call this function, and it will fetch our API from the update data here, and then we can see here, where is that, and then it passing three parameter here: ID, the title, and the content. So this is the thing, we need to update our update data. You can see here, let's say if request dot method is post, okay, and then we can destructure the ID, the title, and the content, right? So it takes from the request dot body. So the next thing, we need to remove this because it will take from the filter, it will take from the ID, and the title will take from the title here, and also the content. Okay, so now we can test, we can refresh here, and then we can try to edit, and let's say we change this. This is my edited post, and then we submit, and yep, we can see it's changing here. All right, so I think we finished with our tutorial, and we can see it's error here. Why? It's because the same, we need to expect the data. We can delete this, and we can save, and Yep, it's finished. So I think that's it. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial and see you in the next time. Bye bye.